there used to be a very linear path to finding success and knowing that you nailed it. Now there are so many channels and there's so many metrics. It's actually very convoluted and a little bit more complex. And I find that more often than not, people don't really know what they're looking for. And people in the positions of creativity or marketing roles, it's more these days than just producing pretty images or a powerful video piece. Did it have the ROI? Did it do this? Did it do that? And it all starts to feel kind of homogenized. Just because something is getting views or likes or impressions, does that actually equate to sales? Does it equate to value?
Welcome to the Backcountry Marketing Podcast. Today, I'm sitting down with Chris Burkard, the photographer, creative director, adventurer, amidst only many other titles. Chris, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, man. I'm stoked to be here, especially after kind of falling in love with the podcast and sort of binging a few amazing episodes. I feel honored to be a part of it.
I appreciate that. This show wouldn't be anything without the folks that share their time and their insights. And so right back at you. You're helping bring together another episode. We connected a couple weeks ago.
Yeah.
And we're trying to align on, what could we talk about that might be a unique perspective? And, if I had to sum up 2024, at least in my own perspective, in one word, I might choose the word change because I feel like everything is changing. The role of creatives is changing in the outdoor industry. The needs that brands have is constantly changing. Channels are changing. Audiences are changing. And amongst all that change is a lot of anxiety, but also opportunity. And, I would love to hear your perspective on kind of this topic of change.
Absolutely.
You could speak to that incredibly well. So I guess my first question is, do you see change happening all around you right now?
All around me all the time. And it's been an interesting path because not to like date myself, but I've been doing this for a minute. And I sort of, there are moments where I realize just how long I've been in the industry. And it's odd because there was for so many years I was like, oh yeah, I'm the young gun. I'm the guy looking up at older people who were the creative directors or the art directors or whatever, the people that I was working with, the editors, and now I'm sort of looking down and I'm like, whoa, I'm older, or I'm at that age. And I think that what's most interesting to me, Cole, is like there used to be a very linear path to finding success and knowing that you nailed it, knowing that you did the job that the brand or the magazine or whatever the title is that hired you wanted you to do. And now, especially kind of since, social media, probably more so because now there are so many channels and there's so many metrics. It feels like the path is much less linear. It's much less straightforward. It's actually very convoluted and a little bit more complex. And I find that more often than not, all due respect to people who hold these roles, but people don't really know what they're looking for, and people in the positions of creativity or marketing roles, it becomes more challenging than ever as somebody who's kind of the hired the hired help, I guess you could say, to define like if you really if you hit the mark, if you did a good job. It's more these days than just producing pretty images or a powerful video piece. Did it have the ROI? Did it do this? Did it do that? And I, to echo the words that some of the other really talented folks who you've interviewed have said, like it all starts to feel kind of homogenous, I guess you could say. And it becomes a little bit complicated because just because something is getting views or likes or impressions, does that actually equate to sales? Does it equate to value? I don't know. And so, yeah, to answer your question in a long-winded way, I agree. There is a lot of change, and it kind of keeps changing, right?
So do you feel like, so you said times were simpler back in the day, so to speak, like what you shot for a magazine, you got a cover and that led to another cover and
Yeah.
that led to more brand deals?
Yeah, and I think more like when you would, oftentimes maybe 15, 16 years ago, going out and shooting a commercial project, it was like, here's the brief. The brief is very clear, very simple. And you kind of, I feel like I was working a lot of times with people who really knew what they wanted and could kind of set up some really safe guardrails for us to play in. Like if you're the creative, like the goal is to kind of push the limits, but not push it too far. And now I feel like it's a little different. You're kind of you're being put into a role more so if you are a hired photographer, videographer, production studio, whatever. You're operating sometimes as a miniature creative agency a little bit. And that can be really fun. And trust me, I don't want to take anything away from that. But for those people coming up, it becomes a little bit complicated because you're having to do quite a bit. And maybe some of that stuff is a bit out of your scope. And, and and I think that, brands are really leaning into creatives in that way quite a bit.
So you mentioned, or you're alluding to the fact that maybe folks who work at brands maybe don't have as clear of directions as
Mm,
maybe they once did. And I'm
yeah.
curious if you could kind of explain that. What do you see,
Mm.
and perhaps why is that?
Yeah, so I think the I always sort of field a conversation, the same way, whether it's, I guess you could say I sort of operate in a few different worlds. I operate a bit in the, photography production space with my studio. I also operate sort of in the influencer space a little bit. Also operate as like an athlete in some capacity. So I often fill these different needs for brands and have sort of, spread my tentacles out throughout. But I would say I start every conversation the same way. It doesn't really matter if I'm being hired to go shoot a, Corona broadcast spot as a director or being asked to ride a bike as an athlete. It's how do we define success in this relationship? What would that look like? At the end of the road, when all is said and done and the checks are sent and everything, what's going to make you feel good about this partnership? And um, that is usually where I kinda get a long pause, and I would say 1 time out of 10, I get an answer. Usually, it's a bit more of like, "Okay, let's follow up. I'll let you chew on that." And that's really tricky because I feel like
Mm.
for me, it's more clear what I want, but I'm not the person who's paying the bills. Um, and so I find that gives me a lot of pause. That gives me a lot of, maybe concern sometimes because if your people are in the position where they're spending the money, hiring, the talent, hiring the whatever, and they don't really know what at the end of the day, will success will look like. I mean, of course, we can't always control these things, but I think that that gives me a little bit more concern as where before it was more linear. Now, I wanna just caveat that by saying that it's tricky because say you are in a production situation where you're the hired production company, and you are, making assets that then the brand can use on somebody else's channel. Does that make sense? Like if I'm being hired, Chris Burkard
Mhm.
Studio, or your production company is being hired to kind of make a video that then somebody on their team can promote on their social channels, or maybe there's a group of influential people who are going to spread that out. See, what's tricky is that you're not creating something for the brand's channels, you're creating something for somebody else's channels, and then whose fault is it if it doesn't perform well? Is it the brand's? Is it yours? Is it theirs? Do you know what I'm saying? And so
Absolutely.
I mean, you know exactly because you've been there and I've been there too, and what ends up happening is at the end of the day, there's this happening, there's like the point the finger, and I totally forget her name. I think she was with Cotopaxi. She
Kristen?
yeah, she's had just some great one-liners. I took a bunch of notes, and um, she had some thoughts that were really interesting, kind of around a bit about, like, this risk-taking mentality and kind of the need to take risks, but also the need for, like, somebody to step up and be excited around, like, raising their hand and saying, like, "Hey, I'm willing to, like, put myself on the line for this." And I think what ends up happening is, and to kinda give the creatives, at the brand side some credit, is that, they don't have as long of a leash either, and so you have people who are less willing to, like, go out on a limb, try the crazy thing, do the new thing, and people that wanna just do more of the same. And so she was kinda speaking about this homogenization of what we're seeing, and so I feel like there's a bit of this cycle happening,
Mm.
where because of COVID and because of the fact that, well, not because of COVID, but because of the effects that had on the world and the economy, right? People don't want to lose their jobs, and people want to play it safe, and I think I notice this a lot. As another example, you have the creative agency that they land the dream client. They land the Toyota or the Apple or whatever. And I'm sure that they got the client by pitching them a rad, crazy idea that was like full of just ingenuity and inspiration. And then maybe they released that one and they became the agency of record or the agency that they would hire. And the work got more and more stale over time. And this is a tale as old as time because they don't want to take those risks to then lose the client. And I think that on the client's end, people are just taking less big swings because they don't want to miss. So there's less home runs.
Has our I don't wanna make this question sound like I don't appreciate the importance of, like, data-backed creativity because that's super important, but has the reliance on data devalued our appetite for risk?
Yeah, that's a tough one, and I think what you're kind of getting at is like ROI, like return on investment, backed by metrics or backed by analytics, right? And for maybe anybody who's listening to this that doesn't know, is like analytics are the back end data that you can find on any website or anything that aggregates information, right? And I would say social media is one of those places where data is super important. Data can help inform the client. Um, you know, a lot of information. I find myself on both sides of that, where I'm sort of the one, um, maybe leveraging my own channels for that, but I'm also the one creating work for a brand for their channels or creating work for a brand for somebody else's channels. Now, I think it's super important, but I would absolutely not say that it's the only metric. And it's really tough to me where I pour a lot of energy and effort into this idea of like all of that social, digital, blah, 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 all that's important. But at the end of the day, if you can get 300 people into one of your brick and mortar stores to have an event where those people had a physical experience, they're gonna be consumers for life. Like, they're gonna be people that are, preach them the good word. They're your followers, right? And to me, like, that should be the end goal, and I feel like there's so much emphasis nowadays placed upon just, like, how much can we fill the garbage can, the never-ending garbage can of social media because the appetite is endless. It's like, it doesn't matter what you did yesterday, it's all about what you're doing tomorrow. And so, I guess when I think about personal projects or the projects that have been really meaningful for me, they usually look like this. There's kind of a three-pronged approach, right? There's like the social media approach where you're telling a story in real time. It's really cool. You're reaching millions of people, right? Or hundreds of thousands or whatever. And that's great. But those people, maybe they're not actually purchasing or consuming or whatever the goal is. Maybe they're not taking the product, but they are tuning in. And then you have kind of that second tier, which is like maybe you create a film or a zine or editorial in a magazine, and less people see it, but it's a bit more intimate, and those people are more invested, right? So it's like a little bit more investment, a little bit more investment. And then the people that show up at your store, the 200 people, the 300 people who see a film screening, or they see, I don't know, maybe there's a new athlete that you're sponsoring or a new spokesperson who's giving a little presentation or a slideshow. This is kind of like, we're talking about the outdoor sports industry. So I feel like I'm kind of trying to circle around these types of activations. Those people are so valuable to you. And those are the people that I would personally, if I was a marketing director, I would be there at the event looking at every person saying, does this does this, deck that we've circulated around our company that reflects our core audience, do they look like these people that showed up? And
Mm.
and sometimes they don't. And I think that to me is a big red flag. And if they do, that's a big sign of success. Do you know what I'm saying? It's kinda like the companies and brands spend so much time ideating and trying to understand who their audience is. Who is our demographic, right? I think that one of the biggest values that I have had in my life has been trying to do film screenings and do speaking events and just trying to kind of put myself in public settings for companies or for myself. I'm sharing my own film or whatever. And being able to actually meet people and introduce myself to people and connect with people that I know engage with me. And so all I guess what I'm getting at is that the importance for a brand to do that is tenfold, right? So much more. And it informs you as to like who is your audience in real time, not based on analytics, right? Because this is the issue I have with data. And I know that I'm kind of like taking the long path around to answer your question, but the problem with data is that you can look at, Instagram every day and be like, "Oh, we've got 46% female and 27% male and you know, these are their age groups and this and that." But does that mean that those people are consumers? It doesn't mean that. You actually have to like people, which is kind of a problem sometimes in this industry where I feel like we're getting more and more separate from who actually engages with us. And you need to kind of be able to interpolate that data in real time. And I get really excited about that information. I get really excited and I love when I meet somebody where I'm like, wow, I never would have thought that that was a consumer of this brand or my brand. But there they are. They're walking out the door with something of mine that I'm selling, or a brand's jacket or book or shell or whatever. So that information to me is needs to be taken with a grain of salt, I guess.
How important is the audience when it comes to developing creative? I guess in my perspective, like it's paramount. But how have you seen the importance of audience alignment play out in the real world?
Like how important is the audience, like to the brand's kind of ethos, or more just like the relationship they have with them? Is that
Well, if you're as a brand, if you're going to make
Mhm.
something, like you want that thing to resonate with the right people.
Yeah,
And finding that frequency, I think, can be tough sometimes. That
yeah.
resonant frequency.
You're using some really uh, like loving words to describe this, but I would say it's like absolutely crucial. And I honestly, hopefully my there isn't any like jadedness coming across here, but like I definitely see more brands than not who the products that they're making are not informed the by their users, right? By the people that are buying the product. It's informed by like somebody sitting behind a desk being like, "Oh, well, I'm going to ideate this beautiful piece that's my vision, and I'm going to put it out to the world." And then when people don't buy it or accept it, they don't know how to, because they're artists, right? And artists don't like that type of feedback because a lot of times um, the difference between a starving artist and a successful artist is usually validation of some kind. And so let me try to back this up here, but ultimately, Patagonia. I used to work for Patagonia. I was a staff photographer for them early in my career. I was on retainer and I worked under Jane Sievert. She was an incredible photo editor who was there for 28 years. And Patagonia really taught me the value of shooting commercial work, because it was obviously to sell clothing, but it was done in an editorial way. And actually, that is the work that I would say attributed to being able to kind of shoot for brands like National Geographic and whatnot, because it helped me to understand kind of the decisive moment and not forcing it and letting things play out. But the point is, I remember vividly, I had this conversation with them, and this was outside of the photography side of things, but they said, we hire some of the best designers in the world, and oftentimes you can tell a good designer from a great designer if they come in, and a great designer will say, "This pair of shorts is perfect. The best thing I can do is nothing. I'll change nothing." That is me leaving my mark. But the problem is that people that are so intent on leaving their mark, making their name, making their change, despite maybe despite like the kind of reciprocity of needing this change being there, they change it, or they adjust it, or they fix something, or they alter something, or they throw out this crazy color, whatever it is. And I guess what I'm saying is like I feel like the brands I really respect and appreciate are usually the ones um, that are sort of aggregating that information based upon their audience, and you can see it, I think, very clearly. The brands who are on social media responding to people who have witty witty captions, who put time and energy. Like this is what's funny is I'm not like necessarily an advocate for Red Bull at all. Really cool brand. I love what they do for photography personally, but their social media is on point. And what I mean by that is when you see their captions and when you see what they write and what they share and what they respond, it feels like a real person. That person has a personality. When a brand has a personality, we care about it, right? And this is 2024. Like the you know, the entry fee just to get into the industry is that you have to make a jacket that keeps you waterproof, right? So when a consumer goes to North Face, Patagonia, whatever, Mountain Hardwear, they're not looking for a waterproof shell. They're looking for a brand they identify with. And the brands they identify with are it's about so much more than the tech. The tech is great, the tech is cool, it lasts for a moment, and then it vanishes because at the end of the day, they all make something that will keep you warm, they all make something that'll keep you dry. You latch on to these brands because you feel like they're speaking to you, and they do that through the content that they create and what they stand for. And I think that that is something that's hard to track through ROI. It's hard to track through analytics. Um, it's hard to speak to somebody's kind of core values when you're making 6-second TikTok videos, or advertising pieces that are, like, short and sweet and not really, don't have any substance, I guess?
Your observation about a good versus a great product designer, that's really interesting. Can that be applied to the marketing department?
Huh. I mean, I'm kinda speaking directly about the marketing department, as well. There was, years ago, I used to do a lot more, like, brand consulting where I would kinda come in and when, like, a new CEO would come in and I would help, like, shape a photo department or, like, kind of and I would do some presentations, and I stole a lot of my kind of information from brands that I had worked with, pieces that I really liked, and good art directors that I'd worked with, and great, great product designers and line managers, et cetera, et cetera. And the thing that I always appreciated was how, you know, w and you'll probably relate to this, but there are some brands where, like, the marketing initiatives come from the product team. And I feel like that is a little bit backwards, right? Like, the product team is designing like, to me, it's really hard to explain this without, like, the my charts and my graphs, but ultimately, the way I always saw it is that there's kinda like a triangle or a circle, and it can go one way or it can go the other way, and a lot of brands, they kinda what ends up happening is when the marketing department is, not functioning correctly, then what happens is that the marketing initiatives come from product as opposed to like, and we're talking about kind of a specific, type of brand that maybe has athletes and ambassadors and whatever, which is most brands nowadays. Typically, the best way that I have seen it work, where it's not dysfunctional, is that stories aren't told for no reason at all. Like, if you create a product that's just like, what's the purpose? What's the point? Then the marketing department is now, when the marketing initiative is informed by the product, they're trying to force a story, as opposed to marketing department is in touch with the athlete team or the ambassador team or whatever that is, right? These athletes are now telling the team managers what they are doing throughout the year. These are my big projects, my dream projects. They are informing the marketing department that is then saying, this is great. And then they are in touch with the product team. And what's happening is the product team is kind of going back and forth with the marketing department. And what's happening is that then the marketing department is choosing some of these expeditions, activations, projects, whatnot, that will then support this product launch. Does that make sense? I know I'm not explaining it super well, but
So you've got marketing on one point of the triangle, product on the other, and then
yeah,
athletes and ambassadors on the other.
yeah, so it's like product is here, ambassadors are here. They're working together. They should be, because the whole point is that the best product is usually informed by the people using it, right? Brands should hire product testers, ambassadors, athletes, whatever, to use it. That's what makes it good. So that product is informed. And then what happens is the new product, it goes up to the marketing team. And then the ambassadors or the athletes, they send their pitches, their ideas up to the marketing team, and the marketing team connects the dots, right? As opposed to it all coming from here, going here, and then they're trying to like splay it out. And this is kind of why for many years the North Face, they had such a good program because what they would do is they would have an athlete summit, and athletes would come and they'd pitch their ideas. They would talk to kind of like this little trio of basically decision makers that sat on their expeditions council. And I'm not sure if I'm like giving away any trade secrets, but a lot of times that expeditions council would be like, okay, these are the expeditions or these are the projects we're going to uh, say yes to or grant money to or whatever. And obviously that would be supported then by like the product. So they would come back, right? And they would say, "Hey, this is what we're doing this year. Which product are you making that could feed into these different trips? Which of these trips would be wise for us to launch this future light or this or that or whatever?" And that like is a much more functional method, I think, of informing the public with in a cool way, right? Why something is made. Now, granted, there are other brands, maybe I'm not sure, but maybe like Cotopaxi, where they don't really operate in that space with athletes and this and that. So they have to kind of do it a different way. And I'm not saying this is the only way, but I am saying that I think that there's a really, I see that as being more functional. And when I've been able to work alongside marketing departments that operate that way, it's much more clear, right?
Sure.
Because when you're trying to kind of force a story, like when I get a brief or you get a brief and it's like, hey, here's this new product, we need to form a story around it. You're like, oh, okay, all right. Like, what's the use case? Like, what are the properties of the product that make it interesting? Is it a jacket that's got this crazy breathability and lightweightness? Is it a camp pillow that, like, for side sleepers? Like, I don't know. Um, and so, yeah, obviously, I know that we're kind of, I'm specifically talking about these kind of, I think, 15 to 20 core brands that operate in that way. But I know that there's a much broader use case in this industry.
So is that what leads to maybe some of the lack of clarity around briefs or direction for creatives? Sounds like it.
I think so. I think it's actually very linear when you're like, "Oh, I'm going on a trip to document these people doing this thing." And they're, professionals doing their job. And in this position, I just have to kind of be there in the right moments at the right places and the deliverables are telling this story. Now, it becomes a bit more tricky when you know, we don't really know like, maybe if they don't know where it's gonna end up. That's tough because, then
You
you s
talking like deliverables?
yeah, like, that's one issue I find a lot, like, we don't know where it's gonna end up. I'm like, "Okay, well, are we shooting this for YouTube? Are we shooting this for social media? Is it vertical? Is it horizontal? Is it" and that becomes its whole own complexity, and I think as you noticed probably too, Cole, like, the deliverables have now doubled, tripled because you're having to do cuts in every variation, and I mean, not that the general public doesn't care about this, but like what works for Instagram stories doesn't work necessarily for vertical Instagram because it's cropped. And then, one is 4 by 5, one is 16 by 9, and then you've got your normal, vertical format, and then you've got YouTube. So, um, deliverables become really big and they become pretty complicated very fast. And I tend to try to like whittle those down to maybe what we feel like is possible. Um, but with that, I don't have like a definitive answer as to like why I feel like it's a complex time. But I think that part of it is kind of chasing trends, which is a part of it, and we all do that. Like, trust me, I mean, even myself a lot for sure. Brands, everything, chasing trends, trying to kind of catch up to the next trend, which is tough. That's a really tough position to be in. And then and then jumping around is really tough where you're like, "Oh, we tried this didn't work. Let's try this now. Let's do this. Now we're gonna do a long form film. Now we're gonna tell a story. Now we're gonna" and I feel like from the consumer's perspective, the consumer's so smart these days. Like they see through that. They see through it when a brand is not authentic or they're trying to like glob onto somebody's authenticity because they don't have it. And And I think that there's nothing more painful than working on a project and feeling like you're making something good, but knowing it's not gonna perform well because of the execution of how it will be put into the world.
Yeah.
And I just last comment is I feel like 9 times out of 10, it's the delivery of it that really informs, and the strategy around delivery that really informs if it will be successful or not.
So we started this by talking about the changing role of creatives. Do you feel like that piece of it, strategy and distribution, is that responsibility being shifted to creatives regardless if they want it or not?
Absolutely. I would say so, you know? I mean, I think you can I think in good conscience, you could keep your mouth shut and just be like, "Cool, let's do it. I'll take the job." Um, but I don't know that there's anybody personally who wants to be hired simply because they have a camera and know how to use it. I think people want to be hired because they're creative, there's collaboration, it's exciting. You're the best at what you do, and we want you, Cole, because you bring this to the table. Like that's like the validation and what you want to find or hear when you're being hired for a job. And so with that, I think that, we feel the need to kind of speak up maybe when we think that something might not work or might not hit the mark. There was a time in my life and career where I was probably a little more sheepish and would just be like, sure, whatever. And I would shoot the job and then it would flop for them or whatever. But I didn't feel responsible. Nowadays, I feel more responsible. And I think the reason I feel more responsible is the reason everybody feels more responsible because you want to share it, right? I don't know how many, I mean, can I ask you, have you done jobs that you've never shared because you're embarrassed?
The portfolio has been, yes, well meticulously crafted.
Totally. And so me too. I have done work that I have shot that I wasn't particularly, excited by. It might have paid well, but I kind of walked away and washed my hands of it. And I think that anybody who has a good conscience feels like they owe those brands maybe a bit of, their 2 cents around if um if it's gonna work or if it's not or whatever, and I also think that there is more room for that now because you start these conversations and then you realize that, there's a lot of undecisiveness or there's a lack of definitive kinda answers around what the goal is, and that leaves, and what ends up happening is that there's a ton of ambiguity and there's a lot of room for error, and as I said before, I don't wanna, be beat onto a dead horse, but it's people not wanting to take the blame if something doesn't work out. Everybody wants to take the blame if it's super successful and it was that crazy wild idea, but nobody wants to, write in stone what the sort of what success looks like, and then if that doesn't work out, then it's, there somebody has to take the blame, right? Which is a bummer. I'm not like trying to stand on some moral high ground. But, I think that why, to answer your question, kind of the path of creatives is now more synonymous with creative direction and or kind of more agency type work too, is because we wanna share it. We wanna share it with our audience. We're proud of the work that we're doing, and until the last, 10 years, we've never had that opportunity. Now with social media, that is a part of it. Also I would say that, I'm put into a little bit of a tricky situation sometimes because I do know my audience really, really well, and so when I have a brief that comes through and in the early days of social media, briefs would I think it's different now. Briefs would come through and it would kinda be like, cut and paste, "We want you to write this, we want you to say this," and I'd be like, "Guys, like, never in a million years would I communicate this way or would I this is cringe, right? Like, this is not me. This is not authentic." I think now all this emphasis is placed on authenticity. It's now a buzzword, sadly, but it's because they want it in your own voice. And so with that, um, if I'm doing a job that's sort of hybrid where like I'm shooting something, but I'm also sharing something, that's the situation where I'm like, "Yeah, I'll shoot it for you, but if you want me to share it, I absolutely need to have some creative control." And so I think that that's part of the role that we're in nowadays a little bit. And I know that my situation is a little unique, so I don't wanna, like, say that this is the industry standard at all, but I do just wanna kinda clarify that a little bit.
Hmm. What's the biggest opportunity you see for brands amidst all of this kind of upheaval and change?
I mean, I think the biggest opportunity is I think the opportunities are kinda endless, really. Like, I feel like, uh, through the noise, to me, really exciting stuff rises to the top, right? And, I there's always been a tried and true method of what's worked over the years, and I guess I feel like the brands that get me excited are the ones that are still putting emphasis into that physical, interaction, that grassroots, kind of like, let's get people to be in a place and experience something real. When I see a project personally, like that's I saw on social media, I followed it, and then it had a film premiere online or whatever, and then there was like an activation or a zine. I'm like, dude, I'm in. Like that is cool because they're giving something to the consumer. They're like providing something like a service, right? Or information or inspiration or creativity or a tangible item like a book or a zine or a guide. That's that's what gets me excited. You know,
Mm.
Patagonia's, Wornwear initiative, which was actually started by a friend of mine, was probably one of the most powerful things. Like, I'm a big, like, student of brands. I love kind of understanding the process and stuff, but now I don't know a single brand that's of that size that doesn't have, like a Rebird or a Sew Shop, and what I'm saying is that they all copy Patagonia's Wornwear initiative, right? And there's nothing wrong with that. That's a great thing for the world, great thing for the environment, but, like, I all I'm saying is that there are opportunities for brands like that to do something new. There was a time when that would have been seen as maybe suicide by a brand to, like, allow people to get their stuff fixed for free and then do a tour around the US and Europe and whatnot where you're fixing people's stuff for free, but, like, that makes people want to jump in bed with them even more, if that makes any sense, and now what you see is every other brand copy paste that same thing, that same initiative.
Do you feel like some brands are paralyzed by all of the opportunity? I call it like the Netflix paralysis. You like log in the Netflix and there's like so many things that you can't actually pick a thing. Do you feel like brands might struggle with some of that paralysis because there's so much that they could do?
I struggle with that too. I don't know about you, but I get like, I get overwhelmed pretty easy. Like if I walk into a grocery store, I'm like, oh my God, there's too many options. I need to go into like a AM PM or something like that. Um, I feel that, and I do think that that is overwhelming. I think as a young brand, I really appreciate I really appreciate brands that are small and that kind of pick a lane and go for it. And I think that just like the creative advice that I would give to, like, young photographers is, like, you don't need to be everything to everybody. There's never been a single editor at a magazine that's hired somebody worth the money or worth their salt because they were good at decent at portraiture and animal photography and weddings and action sports. They hire you because you're a specialist and because you're the best at something. And it's this is the reason why you would hire Paul Nicklin, to shoot under Antarctic ice because he's the best at it, right? So I thought long and hard about that in my career, trying to kind of almost silo myself a little bit. And then once I felt like I had like a good bearing on what I was really good at and competent at, I felt like then I could branch out into other portfolios. And what I'm getting at here is that like brands like Seeger, a young California surf startup kind of brand, it has a cult following, right? They know their lane, they know their space. Brands like Rourke, right, as well, also, they know their lane, they know their space, they know their audience really well, and you see these brands that have had growth like this, right? And I'm not always saying that that growth is great, um, but when brands can manage it well because they care. I mean, I know these brands personally, and who runs them because there's like, a handful of people. You know that they care. You know that they live that lifestyle. What happens is brands get so big that and I've been in this situation where I've worked alongside, new CEOs. It's like they're so detached from who works for them. They don't know them. They don't understand, when you have a 2, 3, 400 person, you know, um, employee roster, like that becomes really hard to manage, right? How do you create continuity? How do you kind of all align? And I do appreciate when brands kind of know who they're talking to, and I think that that is always an important thing to stop and pause and realize that maybe taking a step backwards to recognize that, and sort of refine your lane is important. Um, I see this nowadays a lot with maybe some of the, I'm trying to like say, I'm trying to like share a perspective without pissing anybody off, but I see this a lot with a handful of like the pointy end of the spear brands, if you know what I mean, like the top,
Hmm.
where they're really trying to appease um, a number of audiences that maybe don't see eye to eye. You know, you have your core audience that doesn't feel seen because now you're trying to appease this fashion audience. And then you have this fashion audience that wants to um, wear the clothing because the brand is core, and typically what happens, and I've seen this like so many times in the surf world where you have big, huge brands just crumble, topple. And it is crazy when you see like a juggernaut that seemed like they had it all figured out, just crumble. And I think what's tough is if you totally alienate that core audience, you lose kind of all of your authenticity. Not to throw it back at them, but that's what happens, right?
Yeah.
And but if you lean too far into that core audience and you don't invite other people in, that equally becomes really painful. And I know I'm on a tangent, so I'm really sorry, but I do that sometimes. And I loved the question, and I do feel that paralysis situation because I think that you have these smaller brands who, kinda to bring it full circle, they see what happened and they're like, "Whoa, we wanna be even more specific, a little more hyper specific at the start at least, because we don't wanna go the route that they did," right? So,
Hmm. Has good creative been commoditized? Does it have the same value as it once did?
no, I don't think so. Um, you know, because, well, I mean, that's a tough thing because, you can who's to say, right? Because there are times when I have argued that point, and then there are times when I've been wrong. I think a part of being in this field long enough is you realize when you're wrong. I mean, there are times when somebody could go and shoot something that you or I did with all of our toys and all of our tricks and all of our this and that. They shot something with their phone and it performed better. And that's really tough. And I honestly, I really feel for people in marketing departments who are like, well, who do we hire? Do we hire this, person who's just like really good at making things nimble and easy and quick, and maybe he's going to cost 1/10 of the price? Or are we going to, use this production company that's tried and true and tested? And I think that it depends on the type of work that you're creating, and if it's long form content, that has a storyline and a narrative and an arc, that's really important that you work with somebody who knows and gets that. If it's short and it's small and it's simple, like why not take a stab, like take a risk. But it isn't. I don't think the value is there to what it once was for sure, and just the budgets aren't there. And I will say I think it's a really hard time in the outdoor industry right now personally. Just not saying like personally, but just from everybody I talk to and me personally, it seems like it's a tricky time.
So you mentioned you get overwhelmed.
Yeah.
Does all this change overwhelm you? And if so, like
Mhm.
what are some truths or some things that you hang on to try
Mm.
and help you personally navigate all of the change that maybe others, creatives and brands could latch onto as well?
Yeah. You know, um, that is a great question, man. That is such a good question. I don't think I've ever been asked that one because I sort of have those truths like within my personal life, like my North Star, like why am I doing what I'm doing? What's my thesis? What's my mission statement? Um, I feel like the best way to answer that is to say that, I try to remind myself that if I don't align with the brand personally, like if I wouldn't go out and buy those clothes or subscribe to that magazine or whatever it is, or if I don't know their mission statement, um, then I probably wouldn't consider myself the best person to work for them. And what I mean by that is like when I've taught workshops in the past, and there's young photographers, and I'll always ask them the same question, like, "How many of you wanna work for Nat Geo?" And everybody raises their hand, and I'm like, "How many of you know their mission statement?" And, like, nobody can repeat it.
I think I've seen these videos of you doing that.
Yeah, and it's like, it's simple. It's like, I if you want to work for them, and if you want to create something good for them, then you need to be a student of that company or that brand, and I find myself doing the research, spending the time, um, and being a creative that I feel if a brand is hiring, is going to kind of do his due diligence to understand their audience. I'll spend a good couple hours just like scrolling through their Instagram feed, looking at what people are responding to them, look at how they're communicating back and forth, because maybe that's the linchpin that's the issue, right? Um, I take it upon myself to do a little bit of research to kind of understand and maybe just market research to sort of figure out what's missing, right? Because although I'm asking them, what does success look like? I'm also asking that of myself, and I'm trying to understand that. And I do feel like, to me, inspiration is always king, right? That's just what I've always felt. Like if a brand can inspire me, I want to support them. If a brand can get me off the couch, I want to support them. If a brand does something bold, I wanna support them because I wanna reward that behavior. Does that make sense? Like, and I it's
Mhm.
hard for me to say, like, if this is just a me thing or if this is what everybody feels, but, even, like, the other day, Mammut did that, ad campaign where they're like, "We're not a streetwear brand," and despite what people feel, I'm like, "That's a bold statement." Like, I love that. That's
You
cool.
gotta
That
respect that.
Yeah, you gotta respect that, and I think that is exactly what I'm talking about, and with Patagonia, like, the choices they've made for the environment, people glob onto that, when you wear Patagonia clothing, you feel like you're representing the environment in some way, and so, I think that brands nowadays there was a time when it didn't really matter what you wore as a consumer. I'm a consumer, you're a consumer, but nowadays, you know, I don't wanna get too serious here, but, like, we kind of share publicly with the world, how we vote, what we care about, what our morals are, what we love in life, based upon the brands that we wear, based upon the clothing we wear. And I mean, and that's how it's always been. You have a big Nike hat, you're a runner or whatever. And so I think that that is universal, I guess, and that is something that will always stay the same. And I really consider and think about my place within that world in terms of creating, advertising, meaningful advertising. What I ask myself often, like weekly, what does that mean? What does it mean to create meaningful advertising um, that not only, made its mark for the brand or, turned the page, but also I felt good about. And I think that looking back, at the jobs that, like, seem to hit those marks, universally, it seems to be that, when something is inspiring or when something tells a meaningful story, that is interesting and it's story driven, story first, I tend to feel like that's really successful. But then again, that's also what I'm passionate about, so I have bias, sorry.
We all do. Any last thoughts that you wanna share with the audience before I let you go?
Man, I don't know. I really hope that, young creatives out there, search for good, mentorship. And, I would say that I think that in and of itself will really help, um, the creative space just operate more functionally and more fluidly. And I remember when I was a young, young guy coming up in this space as a photographer trying to, get advice, there was a couple people that took me under their wing and really helped. And there was a couple photo editors, Pete Terrace, Jane Seaver at Patagonia, who made all the difference. They changed my life, because they gave me harsh feedback. And this sort of answers maybe one of your other questions in a different way. But the way in which I think brands get more of what they want is by being willing to offer that harsh critique, that feedback, and uh, there's nothing more painful than when you shoot something and you never see it go live, or you never see it come to fruition. And having to write that email to be like, was there something wrong with the work? Like, that is a vulnerable email to write, and it's not fun. And I guess what I would say is that there are times where um, I really would have just been appreciative of a little bit more critique, a little bit more feedback, a little bit more dialogue between me and the decision makers. There was a creative director, a marketing director at North Face I worked with for a number of years who was just so good and so honest and very much like a bring you in, like we're gonna figure this out kind of thing. And I loved that. His name was Landon. He was a great guy. And there have been people over the years who have kind of helped shape who I am. And I guess what I would say is I really want people in that role who are strong personalities, who are not afraid to who are not afraid to call it as it is and who are not afraid to maybe, bum somebody out if it means that collectively the work is better. Because I would rather leave, maybe my feelings a little bit hurt, but knowing that we got the job done and that I grew from it, than being disillusioned to the fact that like I nailed it. I nailed it for the company or for the brand, but like it wasn't what they wanted. And
Mm.
so I think that's a full circle thing. Photographers need to look for mentors and directors and whatever, camera ops. They need to look for mentors. They need to be able to take good critiques. They need to be able to take good feedback. And then inversely, the brands, they need to be able to offer good feedback, right? And they need to be able to offer harsh feedback sometimes. Um, and because that's what makes the industry better. That's what makes it grow. Like I have come around sometimes, done a job that was okay, lackluster, and then the next time I nailed it. And it happened because they knew that I was learning and growing and they didn't just like write me off and they helped me grow. And I just want to see more of that.
Mm. Beautiful.
Thanks, man.
Chris, thanks for taking the time to share your thoughts. It's awesome to hear your
Yeah.
perspective and your insights. Thank you.
Dude, I could chat with you all day. It's honestly, I love what you're doing. Love your podcast. I think I know this is not your core job, so I just want to say like I appreciate the time because I think that it has been an amazing tool. The amount of people that I've forwarded it to, sent it to, just to say, hey, like this gives you a good pulse on the industry. And even just knowing that other people are feeling the same way that you and I are, or other, marketing directors is really helpful.
Appreciate it.
Yeah.
That keeps me going.
Yeah.
This is it's a slog, as you know, but I think every conversation makes it worth it
Yeah.
because you get to meet someone, you get to learn that much more.
I
So
totally agree.
I'm sure people can find you on the internet somewhere. Is there anywhere you want to point them specifically?
No, I'm out there. I'm easy to find and I'm always down to chat and love a good, chit chat around marketing, projects, jobs, and whether it's a young creative or a seasoned, marketing person, it's always fun. I love connecting people in this industry. So
Amazing.
cool.
Chris, have a great rest of your day.
Cheers.
Bye.